Hello, thank you so much for that invite. And hello, great to have so many of you here. We're going to talk about this wonderful book that Ijeoma has written. And it's a fantastic book. I just hugely recommend it for anyone who's just curious about how the world works, chemistry, life. It's got, and also just philosophy of life. It's like, you know, how to live your life. It's got so much in it. And we're going to kind of explore that, unpack that in this event, and then open it up to questions. But first, before we do that, can I just get a set of hands? Who here reads books? Okay, now put your hand down if, not yet, no, keep it up. Put your hand down if you really read books. Okay, there's one there. No, good. What an audience. Book readers. No, it's just that people sort of say, do you read books? And they say, yes, but they only read one in the last 10 years. And that's not really what I mean. I mean, like you read one every, well, a few a year. How many do you read a year? Two a week? Wow. You're at the right event. That's good.
Well done.
Yes, okay. Anyway, so it's about writing books and what to say in the books. And you know, everyone has a book in them. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And we've all got things to say. And this is just, as I was saying before, a great book. Now, I'm going to invite you to read a little bit from it, actually, because I thought it would set the scene very nicely.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Can you all hear me? Great stuff. So I'm going to read a little bit about the book, which sort of introduces why I fell in love with chemistry. This book is about the chemistry of everyday life. It's about the chemistry of us, chemistry of the food we eat and the buildings we're in. And why did I fall in love with chemistry? And I'll start reading and tell you why. So a little bit of context. I was born in Hackney in East London. Anyone from Hackney here? Great, stuck close by, okay. And then when I was about 13 years old, my family moved back to Nigeria. And when we got there, we moved to an area that was devastated by the Civil War. And we were living there. So as a teenager, I'd moved from Stoke Newington to a small town in Nigeria. So I'll begin. Sorry, need to find my place. Yeah, my specific interest in the chemistry of medicines was born from what happened when I was all of 15 years old. A family friend of ours fell seriously ill while staying with us at our home. This family friend, let's call her Nonye, had come to stay with us during the school holidays. Our low-ceilinged house was comfortable, but not luxurious. And we had a large yard abutted by an encampment that was occupied by the still present army that had taken up permanent residence in the southeast of the country since the end of the Civil War. The soldiers had complained about our turkeys and their noise and mess numerous times. When we ignored their protests, they simply took matters into their own hands and killed the birds. When Nonye arrived, first in full happy health, we were still mourning the loss of our turkeys and agonizing about what we would eat on Christmas Day in a few months' time. At the time, Nonye was about 17 years old, 2 years older than I was, and was a beautiful, tall, willowy girl with thick, dark hair that she always wore in tidy plaits around her head. She had clear skin and a very warm, open smile. Her eyes danced in mirth virtually all of the time. She joked around a lot and often teased me mercilessly in a big sisterly manner. However, not long after Nonye's arrival, she fell gravely ill. Her illness grew worse, and she suffered with chills, bed-rattling rigor, and a disappearing of herself, symptoms which were unbelievably frightening. My father asked a doctor friend to come over and have a look at her. He shambled in, obviously drunk, and prescribed some medicines for malaria. He was a well-known character, with one sock usually missing and invariably unclean shirting. After 3 days of antimalarials and much wringing of hands, Nonye showed no improvement. We watched our lovely Nonye start to fade away. We saw her become quieter and quieter and more motionless than the day before. only rousing to work through a roasting fever once a day. Her food intake was minimal to none, and her water intake, forced down by one of us, was met with mutual drenching. We all feared she was heading over the line. The local hospital was apparently dysfunctional and not worth a visit. So in desperation, my father sent for a very expensive doctor with a formidable reputation, who lived further away from us. His smile was condescending, and he seemed to look down on everyone from a height, even though he was only 5 feet 3 inches tall. He came in, examined Noye for all of 10 minutes, and prescribed a costly antibiotic called gentamicin and an intravenous drip bag. My father scurried off to procure the medication, worry crinkling his face, and anxiety making him move faster than normal. The antibiotic procured, the doctor ribbed up the intravenous drip bag by hooking it to a protrusion on the wall. By now, Noye's breathing seemed to have long pauses, which terrified us all. The good doctor added the gentamicin carefully to the drip bag, once a day for a few days, returning to visit every morning. I'll never forget how the antibiotic first went into that drip bag. I watched the squirt from the needle mix well with the massage bag and disappear into the clear liquid. It looked like nothing was happening. However, the day after the first dose of gentamicin, saw Noye sit up in bed in Lazarus-like bewilderment. Before the antibiotic intravenous drip, we had been helping her with her toileting, with a makeshift bedpan made of an old powdered milk tin, and prodding her to turn over, just to make sure she was still breathing. On the first day after her first dose of gentamicin, she spoke in a quiet, raspy whisper. But as we hadn't heard her voice for the better part of a week, it was an amazing sound. It was a symphony of pure hope in a few whispered words. Noye quietly asked to be led to the toilet, refusing the bedpan, even though it was my job to clean the bedpan, and I had done it that day. We all started crying in relief. She went on to recover from what we later learned was a urinary tract infection, left our house after a few weeks, and made her way home. That was it. I was sold. Whatever that medicine was, I had seen the power of pharmaceutical chemicals with my own eyes, and at 15 years old, I honestly thought I had witnessed a miracle. I still feel a certain lightness when I remember that week.
Thank you. So that's a great passage in the book, and it's a really powerful one. And it kind of is that part. I mean, you say that's how you ended up being a professor of of pharmaceutical nanoscience, and you also talk about magic. And I think that's one of the things I got very strongly from the book, is that you're a whole person. Your whole person is represented in the book. Everything from your views, your emotions, the idea that you can talk about magic and still be a professor of chemistry, right? Because it is magic, right? You put this transparent liquid into another transparent liquid, and someone is recovered. It's indistinguishable from magic.
It was so profound for me.
I'm just going to give you this.
Sorry about that. It was so profound for me because I shared a bedroom with Noye, and she was everything I wasn't. She was beautiful, she had long hair, she was witty, she was confident. I wanted to be her, and I felt I was watching her die. So for me, that was profound to see what looked like water going into water, bringing her back.
And then how do you take that? Because we've all had not experiences exactly like that, but these moments in our lives where you suddenly appreciate just the extreme incredibleness of modern technology to solve problems for us, whether it's in, being able to phone someone across the world, or watch a football match, or that's hanging on in another continent, or heal someone miraculously. How did that sort of feeling of just awe then translate it into actually getting into science and being a chemist?
So like I said, when I was very, very young, and I went to a grammar school in Stoke Newington, and I actually wanted to write Enid Blyton books. That was my dream. I wanted to be like Enid Blyton. I felt that her stories were amazing, and I wanted to write like that. And then, of course, my family moved back to Nigeria, and English language was taught as a foreign language. And I hadn't learned it like that. And suddenly you had to learn how to construct sentences in a proper way. And I lost interest, really. But science was the same. So when I got to Nigeria, the science curriculum was familiar. The language had crossed a continent. And I fell into that, really, because of the familiarity of the subject matter. But also I had to catch up, because when I got to Nigeria, they were actually ahead of what we had been doing in London. So I spent a lot of time sort of studying by kerosene light and I talk about studying by kerosene light in the book, in order to catch up. Then, of course, I really, really then started loving the sciences. And then with this very profound experience, I thought I needed to know more. So at 16 years old, I went to university. I was quite young. But if I tell you that I went to university because I loved science and I wanted to be a scientist, that will be a bold-faced lie. I went to university at 16, and what I was really happy about was I would get to hang out with some boys. That was the most important thing for me at that time, and I'm sure some of you can relate. So I got to university. I was very young, definitely one of the youngest in the whole cohort. And, of course, as time went on, I became even more enamored with the sciences. And then after that, I did a master's degree in Nigeria, got married, had kids, and then realized, okay, I want to be a scientist. I want the infrastructure, I want the equipment, I want the chemicals. It was very hard to get those in 1980s Nigeria. So moved to the UK. By that time, I'm a single mother with 3 children, but I'm doing my PhD, and I'm absolutely loving life because I order a chemical on a Tuesday and it arrives on a Wednesday, and that wasn't how it was in Lagos. So I'm having a great time. Even though we're dirt poor, we're living in a bed and breakfast for the homeless, but I'm loving my work amazingly. And then after I finished my PhD, I spent a few years in London. Then I went to Scotland to become a lecturer. And I remember when I went to Scotland, then I had a new boyfriend who later became my husband, and we've been married almost 30 years. And he went up before me to Glasgow to look for our accommodation. And Glasgow in the late 90s, he phoned me and said, "Do you realise there are no black people here? Are you aware?" And I said, yes, but, we're all going to Glasgow. And my husband's German, so, he was acutely aware of the difference, and I was blind to it. So went there, and after about 5.5 years, I became a professor. And then I came back to the south. And again, it's not because I was looking for a place to sort of broaden my science. I came back because I couldn't stand the rain and the dark anymore. After 9 years, I was done with it. So we all moved back, and I started at UCL. And then just continued doing my work, and then eventually we've taken one of our compounds into the clinic. We've made a new molecule that we've tested in humans, which is a huge endeavour, the hardest thing I've ever done, and that's how I am now.
That's an incredible story, and what I wanted to kind of also unpick a little bit, which you talk about in the book, is just all these it's very high tech what you do. It's incredibly advanced science. But in the book, you don't sugarcoat the science at all, but you make it really real in every day's life. And I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about what are the examples that you find so, how do you unpick this? Like, how do you see the world that we're looking at now and think, oh, that's a bit of chemistry over there, and that's a bit of chemistry over there?
So when I first started, I thought to myself, I want to write for an 11-year-old that hasn't really done any chemistry experiments. And I want them to, what I want at the end of this book is I want everybody to look at their loved ones, the things around them, their foods, and I want them to think about atoms making molecules, making stuff. That's what I want them to think about. So I thought, okay, how do I go from an atom to a molecule for an 11-year-old? And the way I do it is I say, if you have one child in a very busy playground, that child can run through the playground freely. Now, if you join one child to another child to another child, and you have a quintet or a quartet of children holding hands, that has moved from one atom to a molecule, because atoms, when they join together, they make molecules. And this quintet of children, if they had to move through a very crowded playground, they would be slower. They would bump into other children. They would behave very differently from the one child. And that's exactly the way one atom behaves very differently from a molecule. And then you can think about your cells. And when we think about our cells, we are mostly water. We should be just a puddle on the floor of water with a dollop is a scientific word, a dollop of protein, a little pinch of carbohydrate, a smidgen of fat, and the odd gene or two. And that should be us. But we're not a puddle. And the reason we're not a puddle is that all the molecules that I've just described are held together by chemical bonds to form cells. And those cells are held together by chemical bonds to form organs, your eyes, your liver, your kidney. And all of that is held together by chemical bonds to form me, you, and every single person, animal, or plant in the world. That is chemistry everywhere. So when you leave here, I want you to look at the person you love the most. And I want you to see water, protein, fat, carbohydrate, and the odd gene. And to just say, but actually you're looking wonderful with it.
There is quite a lot of fashion statements in the book, actually. You're quite a fashionable person.
I do talk about clothes. Someone said to me, you talk about food a lot and you talk about clothes a lot. Well, I do. I really love food, so I spend quite a bit of time in the book talking about cooking food. But our clothes, again, our clothes make us feel good and special when we get dressed. I mean, I really worked on my outfit. I hope you appreciate it. I really worked on it today. And a lot of people do work on their clothes. But then I think about, what are our clothes made of? They're made of mostly polymers. And what are polymers? So you get polymers when you've joined the atoms to make a molecule, and then you've joined these molecules to each other to make a long chain of molecules, which we call polymers. And so those of you that are working in chemistry know what polymers are. But I sort of set out with this book for an 11-year-old that hasn't quite got to the stage that most of you are at. Now, these very long molecules are important for making the clothes, because very long molecules allow us to have very long fibers that don't break up so easily. And these long fibers then can be woven into the clothes. And the clothes all have different textures and different weights and different sort of appearances. So silk, which is something I really love, tends to have a sheen. And that sheen is because the shape of the fibers is almost triangular. So the light sort of bounces off those fibers in a way that gives that material some sheen. And then you think about wool fiber. Wool fiber we would wear to keep warm, because it has little pockets and it can keep air, little pockets of air in, and that insulates us. So I really get down into these fibers so that people understand them. Who's ever had anything shrink in the wash? So I talk about shrinking in the wash as well. And when wool shrinks in the wash, what you have is that you have the wool fibers moving against each other and then getting trapped against each other. And once they're trapped, you lose that little air pocket, and the whole material becomes smaller. In fact, wool can shrink to 50% of its volume if you put it in the wash and you agitate it a lot. People think it's hot water, but all you need is water and agitation. That's why in your wool wash, who's ever made the mistake of believing the wool wash is a wool wash? I have, and I've still had a shrunken material. But in the wool wash, it tends to be a gentle a gentle sort of movement, so you don't have the fibers moving against each other and getting trapped. Because they've got little hooks, and those hooks cause them to become trapped. So I talk about that in the book quite a bit, and how then you can have wool fibers that don't shrink so much. So, yeah. And I talk about dyeing. Who's ever had a red fabric dye a white fabric in the wash? And because when you have red dyes, especially linked to cotton fabrics, their linkages is a weaker bond. So they can come off in the wash, get into the water, and they're looking for something else to bond with. And they bond with that your pristine white school shirt, and of course you then have your laundry disaster.
Yeah, I mean it's so insightful, all your examples you give you, and also I mean if you'll save money by buying this book, because you won't make the mistake of believing the wool wash, right? Don't ever put woolens in the washing machine. I'm afraid. In fact, I've got a good tip on this, just as an aside. Like, put them in the freezer, because it will kill all the bacteria that will cause the smell, right? And unless it's actually stained, you can then continue to wear it. Just don't. And jeans, there's another one. Don't wash jeans. Put them in the freezer. That's it. So easy. Anyway. Okay. But on that note, I think we're going to switch to some questions. Has anyone got any questions? Yes, there's one there.
Hi.
Hello.
My question was, how do atoms come into existence?
That's a fabulous one, definitely above my pay grade. And then we get into the realms of physics. So atoms, of course, consist of a whole set of other particles, neutrons and protons and electrons are in atoms.
Oh,
now,
okay.
how they came into existence, that's a good one. That's for the physicists. But when we think about the things that we can see and the things that we can touch, they're all made of atoms, every single one of them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
That was a fabulous question.
You talk about the magic of the wondrous chemistry of everyday life. I'm wondering if you can tell us, just in a small amount of detail, what actually
what I do.
Interest is in it. Yes.
Yeah, so my research is around making medicines. And we try and make medicines that have fewer side effects. And the way we do this is that we put drug molecules into very small particles. And these very small particles, we've designed the molecules that make these small particles, so they have certain properties. And once you have your drug molecules in these small particles, these particles are about a thousandth of the width of a human hair, so they're incredibly small. If you have a bunch of them in liquid, they just look transparent like this. It's not cloudy or anything. Once you put your drug molecules in these particles, you can control better where the drug molecules go. So you can direct them to the area that is diseased in the body and away from the healthy tissue. And so what we did in our clinical trial is that we made eye drops where the drug molecules were in these particles. And when you put those eye drops in your eye, what we observed it in rabbits, but what we observed in humans is that you don't get any of the drug in the blood. Whereas with other eye drops, where you just have a solution, you don't have particles, you will get some of that drug in the blood. And with very potent drugs, you then have some side effects. So that's what we do.
There's a question there. It was on the left first.
Sorry.
Try and keep that.
Is there like a problem with chemistry that you wish you could solve with chemistry? That's something that would seem quite easy, but it's actually a lot harder than one might think.
Yes, I mean, that's a fabulous question, because it leads me to talk about plastics. So when we think about plastics, I mean, hands up anyone who thinks that plastics are good. Hands up who thinks they're really bad. Okay, so a bit of both. Well, if you think about plastics, before we had plastics, the world was a very different place. And I'm talking about just before the 1920s in the last century. And in the book, I imagine a world without plastics. And that is a world where actually people die more. And I talk about, for example, first of all, thinking about the way our food is produced and we buy our food. Whenever you go to the supermarket, there's plastic all around your food. If you you want to buy some meat, it's encased in plastic, some vegetables encased in plastic. This allows those foods to have a longer shelf life. Now, in days before we had plastics, you would go to the store, you would buy your fish, buy your meat, you didn't have your plastic bag, you would have to carry your materials home chest high, and you wouldn't buy too many heavy things because your paper bag wasn't very strong. You'd get home, and I describe a scenario where the paper bag breaks and you've lost all your food, everything's on the floor, and you have to go and do it all again. And because you don't have, the food is more expensive because it has a shorter shelf life, you then end up finding it very difficult to feed your family. You then go to the hospital and you get into your hospital bed. There is no plastic lining. Someone has died on the bed before you arrived, and it's still stained. It might have been a bit wiped, but it still contains whatever the fluids that came out of that person, or someone bled out on the bed. And there's no plastic layer to separate you, so you lie on that. You don't have plastic syringes, and so you have glass syringes that have to be sterilized and boiled, and maybe someone's in a bit of a hurry, doesn't really sterilize them very well, so you transfer one microbe from one patient to another, and of course, patients are more likely to die in that kind of scenario. And I go on and trace how plastics have been revolutionary. They've allowed us to have cheaper cars. They've allowed us to build our homes with cheaper materials. And even when I think about the work that a woman normally does, and from my generation, I washed the nappies. I didn't have, and these were cloth nappies. And at the moment, we have nappies with plastic that we can dispose of. So if you think about a world without plastics, it's actually quite bleak. But you ask me something that seems quite simple that we could get rid of. It would be fantastic if we could have plastics that were biodegradable, that would disappear after we'd used them. So we still have this very durable, modern miracle of a material, but we don't have the waste. We don't have the microplastics in our bodies, because we do have fragments of microplastics in our bodies, it's been found. We also don't have plastics in landfill. That would be a problem that would be fantastic if chemists could sort out. They are trying, because there are some enzymes that degrade one of the most common plastics used for water bottles. But we really need effort on this. We need to make sure we reverse the plastic waste problem.
This is going to be the last question, because we're running out of time, but go ahead. Sorry.
You mentioned that testing on humans was one of the hardest things you had to do. What sort of stuff did you do beforehand to make sure you and your team were confident about testing on humans? And what was that like?
Very, very good. So it's a long process. It took us many years. You have to design your molecule. Once you've designed your molecule, you have to test it. And of course, you design many molecules and you test many molecules until you find one that really does what you want it to do. You then have to ensure that it's incredibly safe, and you have to do, by law, you have to do many tests to make sure it's safe before you get into humans. Then you have to manufacture it in a very controlled way so that it's everything you do, you can do it again in exactly the same way. It is 100% reproducible and 100% controlled. And once you've done that, you have to get the money together to do the clinical trial. It's millions of pounds. And then you're able to contract a company to do the work for you. So there is quite a lot to do before that.
Well, that's a fantastic end to this event, because what it kind of describes is how far you've come in your adventures from Hackney to be such an expert, to get to design a drug, manufacture a drug, solve a human problem, get the money together. That's another aspect of being a scientist. You have to actually, you know, make the case. And that's also why communication skills are so important for scientists. It's an absolute key skill to do what you're doing, to do what any scientist is doing. You actually not just need to be good at the science, you actually need to be persuasive and be able to say to people very clearly, this is what we're doing, this is why it's important, this is why you need to allocate the funds to me and not someone else. So, and you've managed to do all that.
Spend a lot of time saying, don't give it to them. Give it to me.
Yeah, exactly. And you've done it with style, which is, you know, not necessary, but very much appreciated.
Oh, thanks, Mara.
So, yeah, let's thank Ijeoma. And I think there's a link to the, if you're interested in reading the book or having a look more, there's a link to the book there on that QR code. But it just remains for me to say thank you to all the Royal Society staff for organising this and the tech staff. Thanks. Thank you to you all for coming and being such a brilliant audience, asking great questions, reading so many books. Continue to read books, everybody. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.